The baby was still warm when Caleb Hollister found her. He had come out onto the porch in the blue hour before dawn, coffee tin in one hand, rifle in the other out of habit more than fear, and he had almost stepped on the bundle before his eyes adjusted enough to see what it was. A folded quilt, a small dark head, a hand no bigger than a walnut, curled against the cold. The porch boards were rimed with frost, and the child had been placed on the one square of wood that caught the first heat of the rising sun. Whoever left her had known his house. Caleb set the rifle down slow. He set the coffee tin down slower. He knelt, and his knees cracked like old timber, and he lifted the bundle with both hands the way he had lifted foals and lambs and once, 20 years back, the body of his brother out of the creek. The baby did not cry. She only blinked up at him with eyes the color of wet river stone, and she made a small sound that was not quite a word and not quite a question, and Caleb Hollister, 46 years old and alone for 11 of them, felt something inside his chest that he had believed dead move again. Pinned to the quilt was a scrap of butcher paper, for words in a woman's hand. Her name is Wren. He stood there a long minute. In the doorway of the small cabin he had built himself on 160 acres of Wyoming grass, in the last week of April in the year of our Lord 1889, and he looked out across the pasture where his 6 horses were beginning to stir, and he understood that the life he had been living up until this morning was over. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's a kitchen in Ohio or a caravan in Queensland or a fireside somewhere in the Highlands, tell us in the comments. We love knowing who's with us at the fire. Now, back to Caleb. He carried her inside. He built the stove up. He heated goat's milk from the jar in the spring house and tore a corner from a clean flour sack and twisted it into a teat, the way he had seen his mother do for a foundling lamb 35 years ago. And he sat in the rocker by the stove and fed the baby, and she took the milk with a small, furious hunger that made him almost laugh out loud. Her weight in the crook of his arm was less than the weight of a full water bucket. He kept checking to see if she was still breathing. By the time full sun came up over the eastern ridge, he had made 3 decisions that would set the whole town of Ashfork against him before the week was out. He would not take her to the sheriff. He would not take her to the church. He would not give her up until he knew who had left her and why, and whether they had done it out of love or out of something colder. The morning he rode into town, he wrapped her against his chest in the sling he had woven from a horse blanket and a length of soft twine, and he tucked the note inside his coat pocket where nobody could ask to see it. The road into Ashfork ran along the Powder River, and the cottonwoods were just breaking leaf, and the whole valley smelled of wet earth and coming spring. He did not stop at the sheriff's office. He rode straight to the general store, tied his horse, and walked in with a baby on his chest. The bell above the door rang, and every conversation in the store stopped. Ellery Doss was behind the counter. She was 38 years old, widowed 6 years back when the fever took her husband and both her children in the same November week, and she had run the store alone ever since. She wiped the same spot on the counter 3 times before she looked up, which was a thing she did when she was trying not to feel anything. When she saw the baby, her hand went still. Her face did not change, but the rag stopped moving. "Caleb," she said. "I need what a baby needs," he said. "I don't know what that is." "I'm hoping you do." She came around the counter without a word. She looked at the baby. She looked at him. She looked at the baby again. She reached out one finger and touched the small hand, and the small hand closed around her finger the way a drowning person closes on a rope. "Whose is she?" Ellery said. It was not a question. "Mine," Caleb said. As of this morning. Someone behind him made a small sound of scandal. Someone else made a sound that was closer to hunger. Ellery did not look away from the child. "You'll need canned milk," she said. "Nipples. Cotton for bindings. A tin bath. A cradle you don't have and cannot build in one afternoon. So you'll take the one in my back room that has been sitting there empty since." Her voice caught, just once, and then continued as if it had not. "Since I have no use for it. You'll take it, Caleb Hollister, and you will not argue with me about it, and you will not pay me for it, because it was never for sale." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded. "Bring her by every 3rd day," Ellery said. "I'll show you what you don't know, which is everything." By the time he rode home that afternoon with the cradle roped to the pack mule and the baby asleep against his heart, the town of Ashfork had already begun to talk. By nightfall the talk had reached Silas Rennick. Silas Rennick owned the bank, the freight line, and 3 of the 4 saloons in Ashfork. He owned the mortgage on 11 of the 15 ranches within a day's ride, including the one that bordered Caleb's on the west. He owned the sheriff, though the sheriff would have said it the other way around. He was 52 years old, silver at the temples, soft-spoken in a way that made men lean in to hear him, and then wish they had not. And he had wanted Caleb Hollister's 160 acres for 6 years, because those acres held the only reliable spring on that side of the Powder. And without that spring, Silas Rennick's expansion north was going to cost him more than he was willing to pay. He came out to the ranch on the 3rd morning. He came alone, which was the frightening part. Silas Rennick alone meant Silas Rennick had already decided how the conversation would end. Caleb met him at the gate with the baby in the sling and his rifle leaning inside the doorway 10 feet behind him. "I hear," Silas said, smiling the way a knife smiles, "that you've become a family man overnight." "I have. A bachelor, living alone, no wife, no womenfolk on the property, raising a female infant of unknown parentage." Silas let the sentence sit in the cold air. "It is going to be said, Caleb, that this arrangement is not proper. It is going to be said in front of a judge, and judges in this territory have taken children from lesser irregularities than this." Caleb looked at him for a long time. "You want the spring," he said. Silas's smile did not move. "I want what is best for the child. The spring's not for sale. Everything is for sale, Caleb. It is only ever a matter of when a man understands the price." He tipped his hat to the sleeping baby against Caleb's chest. "She's a beautiful child. It would be a shame if the county had to take her from you. I hear the sisters in Cheyenne run a fine orphanage. Cold, but fine." He rode away without waiting for an answer. Caleb stood at the gate a long time after the dust settled. Wren stirred against his chest and made her small, not quite a word sound. And he looked down at her, and he understood that he had been drafted into a war he had not chosen and could not walk away from. That evening he rode to Ellery's. He did not go to the front of the store. He tied his horse behind the smokehouse and knocked at the kitchen door. She opened it holding a wooden spoon, and there was flour on her wrist, and she looked at his face and stepped back to let him in without asking why he had come. He told her. All of it. The porch. The note. Silas at the gate. The threat. She listened without interrupting, stirring the pot on the stove in slow circles, and when he was finished, she set the spoon down and wiped her hands on her apron. "You know why he wants the spring," she said. "Cattle. Not just cattle. He has a buyer in Chicago who wants beef by the trainload, and he cannot deliver by the trainload without water he does not have. He has been buying men out for 2 years. He does not buy them out with money if he can help it. He buys them out with fear." She looked at him levelly. "He will take her from you, Caleb. He will go to Judge Meriwether, who owes him $900, and he will have that child in a wagon to Cheyenne inside a fortnight. Then I'll marry," he said, and the words surprised him coming out of his own mouth. She went very still. "You'll marry. A woman on the place makes it proper, makes it a home," takes the argument out of his hand. "And which woman," she said, in a voice so careful it cut, "did you have in mind, Caleb Hollister?" He looked at her, at the flower on her wrist, at the empty cradle shape that had lived in her back room for 6 years, at the way she had wiped the same spot on her counter over and over for 6 years without knowing she was doing it, at the small hand of a stranger's child, and the way it had closed around her finger like she had been waiting her whole life to be caught hold of. "You were the only one I thought of," he said. From the minute he rode away, "You were the only one." She did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, "That is a poor reason to ask a woman to marry you, Caleb. It's not the only reason. What are the others?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. What he found in himself was not a speech. It was one true thing, small enough to fit inside a sentence. "You touched her hand," he said, "and you didn't look away." Ellery Doss stood in her kitchen with her hand on the back of a chair, and she looked at a man she had known distantly for 15 years and truly for 3 days, and she did the thing she had not done since her husband and her children died in the same November week. She let herself want something. "I'll need a day," she said, "to close the store proper, to speak to Reverend Ash." "Take the day," he said. "Take 2. I'll wait. If you're still with us tonight, if this story has found you the way these 2 found each other, what would you have done in her place? Would you have said yes to a man on the 3rd day for a child that wasn't yours? Tell us." We read every one. They were married on a Tuesday morning in the small white church at the north end of Ashfork, with Reverend Ash presiding and the baby Wren asleep in Ellery's arms, and exactly 4 witnesses in the pews: the Reverend's wife, the blacksmith, an old cowhand named Jubal who had ridden for Caleb's father 30 years back, and a woman named Martason Deer who ran the laundry and who nobody had thought to invite, but who came anyway and stood in the back and cried without making a sound. They rode out to the ranch that afternoon. Ellery brought 2 trunks and a rocking chair and a Bible with the names of her dead written inside the front cover. She did not put the Bible away. She set it on the mantel where anyone could see it, and Caleb understood, without her saying, that she was not asking him to make her forget. She was asking him to make room. He did. 3 nights later the barn burned. It went up in the small hours, and by the time Caleb reached it with the water buckets the roof was already gone, and by the time the neighbors came riding in from 4 directions with more buckets, there was nothing left to save. 2 horses had gotten out. For had not. Caleb stood in the smoke with soot on his face and Ellery beside him holding Wren, and he did not weep, though a part of him wanted to, because those 4 horses had been the closest thing to family he had known for 11 years. At the edge of the paddock, half buried in the churned mud, he found a boot print. Narrow, sharp-heeled, the kind of boot a man wore who did not walk in mud for a living. He knelt and looked at it for a long time, and he did not need to say the name out loud. The sheriff came at noon and asked the questions a man asks when he already knows the answers he is not going to write down. He looked at the boot print. He said it could have been anyone's. He said accidents happened. He said Caleb should be careful, in his tone, and it was not the baby he was talking about. That night, after Wren was asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and told Ellery he was going to ride into town in the morning and settle the matter. She said, "You'll do no such thing." He looked up. "You'll ride into town in the morning," she said, "and you and I will settle the matter together. Because he is not going to be beaten by a man with a rifle, Caleb. He has beaten 100 men with rifles. He is going to be beaten by paper, and I know where the paper is." He set his coffee down. 6 years ago," she said, "when my husband was dying, Silas Rennick came to the store and offered me a loan I did not need at a rate that would have ruined me inside a year. I turned him down, but I saw the ledger he was carrying. He had left it open on my counter for a moment, thinking I could not read fast. I could. I have remembered every line of it for 6 years, waiting for a reason to say them out loud." She looked at him across the table. "He has been keeping 2 sets of books, Caleb. One for the tax men, one for himself. The second set is in a safe in the back of his office. He does not know that Martason Deer's oldest boy cleans that office 3 nights a week." Caleb stared at her. "You've been planning this," he said. "I have been surviving," she said. "There is a difference. Until 3 days ago, I had no reason to fight him. Now I do." She looked down at Wren asleep in the cradle by the stove. "She has given us both a reason," she said quietly. "Strange how the things you've stopped hoping for tend to find you on the porch some morning when you weren't looking." He did not answer. There was nothing to add to that. If this story is finding you tonight, if you have ever waited longer than you thought you could bear for a reason to hope again, you are exactly who we wrote this one for. A like, and telling one friend, keeps this fire burning. We are grateful you are here. They rode into Ashfork on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday evening the town had turned inside out. Martason Deer's oldest boy, whose name was Thomas and who was 19 and quiet, and had been cleaning Silas Rennick's office every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday night for 2 years, produced from beneath the false bottom of a mop bucket a leather-bound ledger no thicker than a Bible. Inside it, in Silas Rennick's own careful hand, was every bribe he had paid, every mortgage he had forced through fraud, every deed he had acquired by burning a barn or breaking a fence or driving a widow off her land. There were 41 entries. Judge Meriwether's name appeared 11 times. The sheriff's appeared 19. Ellery Doss did not take the ledger to the sheriff. She took it to the circuit judge who was passing through Ashfork that week on his way to Cheyenne, a man named Halloran who had ridden with her father in the war and who had never taken a dollar from any man he did not respect. She laid the ledger on the desk in his hotel room, and she said, "Read it. Then decide what kind of country you want to leave your grandchildren." Judge Halloran read it. He read it for 2 hours. When he was finished, he looked up at Ellery and at Caleb standing behind her with the baby against his chest, and he said, "Mrs. Hollister, In 40 years of law, I have never been handed a case that came so neatly wrapped. I will need 1 week. He took 8 days. At the end of the 8th day, federal marshals arrived from Cheyenne. They did not come quietly. They came with warrants and with wagons, and with the full force of a territory that had grown tired, at last, of being owned by one man. Silas Rennick was arrested in his own dining room while cutting into a rack of lamb. Judge Meriwether was arrested on the courthouse steps. The sheriff surrendered his badge and was in irons before the sun set. The bank was seized. The freight line was seized. The 3 saloons were seized. The mortgages Silas had acquired by fraud were declared void, and 11 ranches that had been slipping quietly into his pocket were returned, free and clear, to the families who had worked them. The spring on Caleb Hollister's land was never mentioned in the trial. It did not need to be. The man who had wanted it was going to spend the rest of his natural life in the federal prison at Leavenworth, and the country around Ashfork was going to spend the rest of its natural life remembering that once a bachelor rancher and a widowed shopkeeper and a Cheyenne laundress's quiet son had, between them, taken down the largest man in the territory using nothing but a baby's need and a woman's memory of a ledger. The mother of the child never came back. They found out, months later, through a letter posted from San Francisco, that she had been Silas Rennick's own housemaid, a young woman named Della who had discovered too much, and who had known that the only place in the county Silas would never think to look for her child was on the porch of the one man he could not intimidate. She had gone west. She had made a life. She wrote once a year after that, always in April, always to ask if Wren was well, and always with the same closing line. Tell her, when she is old enough, that I loved her enough to leave her with better people than I was. Ellery kept every letter in a tin box beside the Bible on the mantel. The evening after the marshals rode out, Caleb and Ellery sat on the porch where he had found the baby. The sun was going down behind the western ridge, and the pasture was full of new grass, and the 6 horses, for they had bought 2 more to replace the ones the fire took, were grazing along the fence line in the last of the light. Wren was in Ellery's lap. She had grown. She was reaching for things now. She had, that afternoon, closed her hand around Caleb's thumb and said something that was almost a word. "She's going to be a talker," Ellery said. "She comes by it honest," Caleb said. Ellery looked at him sideways. She did not smile exactly, but something in her face let go of something it had been holding for 6 years. "You know," she said, "when you asked me, in the kitchen, I had an answer ready before you finished the question. I made you wait a day only because a woman my age is entitled to at least that much." He looked at her. He looked at the child in her lap. He looked at the pasture and the light on the pasture and the small blue smoke coming from his own chimney. "I would have waited a year," he said. "I would have waited the rest of my life." She did not answer that. She only reached across the porch rail and took his hand. 3 years later, in the summer of 1892, on a Sunday afternoon so clear that a person could see the bighorns from the top of Caleb Hollister's north pasture, Wren Hollister, 3 years old and stubborn as a river stone, walked out to the porch on her own 2 feet and sat down on the exact plank of wood where she had once been left in a folded quilt. She did not know why she liked that plank. She only knew that the sun warmed it first in the morning, and that her mother came out to sit beside her there every evening with a cup of coffee, and that her father, when he came in from the horses, always stopped at that plank before he stepped inside, as if he were greeting an old friend. That afternoon, Ellery came out with her coffee and sat beside the child, and Caleb came up from the barn and stood at the bottom of the steps looking at them. Wren tilted her small head back and squinted up into the sun, and she said, in the clear, ringing voice of a child who has never once been told to be quieter, "Papa, come sit." He came up the steps. He sat. The 3 of them watched the light move across the pasture the way it had moved across pastures for 10,000 years, indifferent to human sorrow and human joy alike. And yet, for the length of one Wyoming summer evening, on one porch, on 160 acres of grass held free and clear against every power that had tried to take it, that light seemed to be shining on exactly the right people at last. Strange, Caleb thought, how the thing you'd stopped waiting for could arrive one morning wrapped in a quilt and change every hour of every day that came after. He did not say it out loud. He did not need to. Ellery was already looking at him, and she already knew. Next, we'll tell you the story of a mute mail-order bride who arrived at a Montana homestead in a snowstorm. and the widowed blacksmith who had been warned about her voice, and who fell in love, instead, with everything she said without speaking. Until then, friends, take good care of one another out there. We'll see you at the fire.